Hello, Body of Messiah. Today we're going to cover TBON Lesson 9, Part 3, Acknowledging the Atrocities of the Black Holocaust. We're going to continue on with this lesson series, but we're going to mainly cover the time period from 1865 through 1965. This time period marks when the Emancipation Proclamation was passed, where slavery was supposedly abolished, and then in 1965, when the Rights Act for Black Americans was passed. But before we begin, I want to show that highlight three legal statutes that were put in place in the Americas prior to 1865, from 1619 through 1865, that continues and it perpetuates and it cycles through American culture down past the times, and their carryovers from the beginning of slavery. The first legal thing that was passed, statute, was that it was illegal for slaves to learn how to read. That is one. And this right here was Satan's attempt to try and keep those Hebrew slaves who had come to the Americas from, I believe, to spiritually, on a spiritual level, read the Bible, read all the commands, to prevent them from knowing who they are as being descendants of Patriarch Abraham and descendants of Israel. If they were able to read it for themselves, they would not have been in this whirlwind of deception, understanding who they are. Now, God was punishing our ancestors because they had given over to idolatry. But if they read the scriptures, they would have realized that God is chastising them. And this was not a part of the lie that a lot of the white supremacists would feed them, that they're cursed, they're not loved by God, God doesn't care for them. They're supposed to be, white supremacists lied to them and made them think that they're supposed to be submissive and under the tyranny of slavery and free labor for the rest of their lives. And this is not taught in God's word. Never. So this is one statute that was passed. Another statute that was placed, that's in the U.S. Constitution, it deems slaves to be 3/5 of a human being. Excuse me. Sometimes I notice I need to put an S on the end of some of this stuff. Slaves to be considered 3/5 of a human being. God created them equal to everyone else, but for some reason, there was a statute made that said that they were only 3/5 of a human being. A lot of people try and argue and say they did this because the slave population in the South outnumbered the ones in the North. But still, if you believe in the whole Word of God, and if they knew for themselves and studied it, there would have been a lot more people on the side of the abolitionists than not. Another statute that was carried over was that slaves were not allowed to own land. This is another statute that was very vital as far as slaves becoming self-sufficient. One part of this that affects their livelihood, not just livelihood, but them being able to feed and eat themselves. There were even some laws that were passed that would not allow them to grow their own food. So they're under the harsh conditions of being in forced labor for free, producing all this produce, planting these crops and reaping them and gathering them, but never being able to reap the benefits of them. This kept them under obligation to the slave owner of those who did own the property and the produce that was generated from them. So these statutes carried through time, even to present day. That's why we have issues with unarmed Black and brown people not getting justice once they have been, their lives have been taken or affected by a police officer or even other white citizens. Now let's go on to this time period. In 1865, I'm going to cover some of the laws that were cases that were passed and laws that were passed that affect to embolden these statutes that were not godly statutes. But I'm going to have some in here that are just summaries of some of the laws that were passed across the state lines. So the first one we're going to cover is the Dred Scott versus Sanford. See, Dred Scott versus Sanford. This case stated in 1857, it said the Constitution was not meant to include slaves. Once again, just like this right here, saying that a slave was not a whole human being, this right here was given validation close to the time of the Emancipation Proclamation, the abolition of slavery going through, that there was a case that said the slaves were not to be included. The things that were applying to the whole Constitution, where it says men were made by their creator with unalienable rights that cannot be violated. There were statutes that were passed and laws to imply that that wasn't true for descendants of African slaves. The next law we're going to cover is Plessy versus Ferguson. In 1896, it said that racial segregation was okay as long as the facilities were of equal quality. Now, I know based on the word of mouth my ancestors passed down because they lived it and experienced it. When you went to a water fountain or a bathroom that was whites only as opposed to black only, it was not equal. It was substandard for the black only facilities. But if the heart of man is not different and doesn't change, then even these laws that said it's okay as long as the facilities are equal, the people who generated or took care of that facility can choose whether or not they abide by this law. Black and brown citizens would try and keep certain facilities clean to a certain extent, as much as they could, but they did not own the property. Number 3, a person could be put in jail for interracial marriage. Now, we know that there was some Japanese citizens who were here, Chinese. This interracial marriage law was not enforced. It was only enforced if there was a black citizen who married a white citizen. So sometimes people were placed in jail if they were found to have married interracially. Here's point number 4. It was illegal for black men to gather in one group. Now, people probably were scared because there were so many slave revolts and uprisings that occurred where our black Hebrew men and women were trying to break free from the oppression of slavery. And so that's probably where they came up with this particular law. But it goes to show you how deep-rooted some of these statutes are that are ingrained even today in American society when it comes to security across our land, from how the police forces ran and certain government forces are ran, security forces are ran. They seem to kind of put a dark light among black men gathering in one group, assuming they're up to no good, assuming they're doing something wrong. This law was never made for white citizens or any other citizens. So that carries over. Number 5, a person could be in prison for just breaking Jim Crow laws. So if a person wanted to drink from a white-only fountain or go to a white-only bathroom and they were not white, they could possibly be placed in jail or prison for so-called breaking this segregation law. That's mind-boggling to think of this type of pressure. Even if one bathroom is out of order, most likely the black only, they had no option. Here we're going to look at the Homestead Act. Now, the Homestead Act is something that's a predecessor to what people talk about when the government engaged in redlining black citizens from being able to move in certain neighborhoods. This is something that the government carried out. But the Homestead Act is a predecessor to that. In the Homestead Act, it gave low-interest loans, home loans, to white citizens and possibly others, but the law specifically stated that these loans were not available to black citizens. They were not allowed to have any of these low-interest home loans to help them to get into a home. And so when you see the today of home ownership between black citizens as opposed to others, you understand this is a carryover from this to redlining, where the government specifically would not allow and engaged in practices along with the bank. Now, these are practices the government engaged in alongside banking institutions to basically oppress and discriminate against black citizens. Oh, and this right here is one of the last one I'm gonna cover, is that it was illegal for black veterans, black veterans who fought in war, died in war, sacrificed the same way in war. It was illegal for black veterans to obtain benefits from the GI Bill. This stuff was, many states would engage in this practice, stating clearly that black veterans were not allowed to reap the benefits of the GI Bill. The GI Bill is something that was created by the government to help veterans to get home loans, or to help them get pay for college for free. You know, it's something that you put a little money into, and you could reap the benefits of it. But there were laws against black veterans who sacrificed equally to be allowed to have these same benefits. Now, mind you, they're fighting in a war, committing their lives, sometimes sacrificing their lives, and still at this point, they were unable to vote in the same society that they're fighting for, to defend in the army, partaking of all things that they had to partake of, and coming home with PTSD, and then coming home having to deal with discrimination. This is amazing here. I'm going to cover also that during this time period, right after the Emancipation Proclamation, you will see during this time period the highest volumes of obelisks being raised. Now, mind you, obelisks, as I've stated before, represent a certain part of Baal's anatomy. So it is a part of Satan worship. People at the higher levels, high levels know this. The people at the lower levels don't. And during this time period, you have the highest volume of Confederate monuments that were raised, and they are raised in the shape of an obelisk. This was Satan's way of saying that I'm still, no matter what, forget what the Emancipation Proclamation said. You're not going to have total freedom. I'm going to continue to try to oppress you, to abuse you, subject you to violence, subject you to all types of neglect and abuse as much as possible. That is Satan's plan against the black and brown Hebrews. And people, if you go back and look at, identify and knowing the signs of Baal worship, but making sure you depart from it, go look at that lesson. And also look again at the Beast and Babylonian System, COOH Lesson 6, Part 4, where I show you that the attire, the outfits that the Roman Catholic Church used to wear, and the Ku Klux Klan, they mirror what statues of Baal back in those days looked like. That long, elongated helmet or whatever that's on their head. I want to show you also that during this time period, there were high volumes of race riots. Racial riots were things that were kicked off due to the fact there was a lie, some false witness was bared against black and brown Hebrews. A main example of this is what we call Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There were also places like Rosewood that was named, Fort Polk, Florida, various places throughout the U.S. where there were race riots. If you go and look on this website here, and this website is called www.blackpast.org. And under that site, there is research under the title of Racial Violence in the United States since 1660. And you will see a list of all these particular racial riots that were started. And they were kicked off due to some false witness, a lie that was against black and brown Hebrews. A lie such as, a white woman was raped, or some white men were attacked and murdered by black men, or just attacked. These racial riots here, people have you think that it was just a few. No, there were at least 90 that are listed in that particular site. And this happened throughout the US during this time. It's a part of the Black Holocaust. I keep saying to people that they want to like brush this off and brush it under the rug, but they never want to brush off the atrocities that were perpetuated against Native Americans or the European Jews. I've heard people say they have this project called the 1916 Project that is coming out, and it's to help uncover the truth about history, the slave history of America. And I've heard Christians say that this is evil and that it will cause children to hate the US government. And to me, that is a lie from Satan. That will no longer cause citizens to hate the government, no more than it will cause the German citizens who had to fess up to the fact that they were honoring these men who used to glorify Hitler and glorify genocide against European Jews. It's no different than unveiling that particular true history. It's no different. We have to know this history so that we will never, ever repeat it again. But in the case of the Black Holocaust, many people want to brush it off, disregard it, and they don't even want to get to the point of first acknowledging that this is true and this did happen. The 1619 Project is to uncover all these truths, true things in history that happened. I've heard an evangelist or minister say that the 1619 Project is based on lies. By the Messiah, every history that Sidrico covers can be covered in historical documentation, in historical books. I give these articles and all these particular things you can go look up for yourself to know this. I will never back up the truth of God's word with something that's not true, because that's not what I'm called to do. So please make sure that you help to enforce projects that are to uncover all of these atrocities, because God is sending judgment on the Babylonian system. And like I said, the only way that the intensity might be lowered is that we go before the Most High. The US and even other countries go before the Most High, humble themselves and repent and try to make amends for these situations. You know, like I said, when our Messiah returned, he don't want to hear none of that. It's just over, because he's going to make come to pass what his daddy, his heavenly Abba, has said is going to come to pass when it comes to the Black and brown Hebrews. Now, another thing I want to share, 2 more articles specifically associated with how Black veterans were treated during this time period, outside of the violence and things that they had to face once they came back from serving in war, the segregation, being attacked, lynched, all kinds of things happening to them and even their family members. I want to give you 2 articles for you to look at so you can see that this information is true. The first site here that you can look at is called Timeline. And the title of this article is Even Nazis Were Surprised, right? The Nazi prisoners of war were surprised at how Texas was treating the Black army men in the South. Now, this is not specific to the South. They always run these headlines and say it's the South, but it happened nationwide. So the Nazi prisoners of war were shocked at how the Texas white soldiers were treating the Black soldiers. So go read the articles and it'll tell you how they were reacting. This other site is called slate.com. And this article covers where a memo was revealed to W.E.B. Du Bois. And this memo was a World War I memo from the World War I era that where the U.S. soldiers, white soldiers, were trying to encourage the French officers to engage in Jim Crow behavior against the Black American troops. So they were trying to encourage them to behave in the way of a segregationist. And the French was like, whatever, these people are on our team fighting for us, so we ain't got time for that. They even were awarded, like over 150 black soldiers were given an award for their service of war in helping the French. Now that's amazing that our veterans couldn't even look for a unified front in our U.S. military in order to honor them in the same way they were honoring their white veterans. But hey, the struggle is real, and the Most High prophesied these things would happen. But we still endure it. Now, I want you guys to go to also reinforce the fact of all these atrocities that happened. Lynchings happened during this time. There were still rapes of black women, murders outside of the violent attacks, and they were traumatic to our black and brown Hebrew people. If any of you Caucasian brothers and sisters have the courage, talk with some of your black friends and ask them if they know of anything that happened in their history. And I guarantee you, if they have the emotional, mm, I guess, emotional strength to discuss it, they will share with you. In every black family, they can speak of at least one incident where an ancestor of theirs was traumatized, abused, attacked. I have an auntie, and she got raped by a police force, a sheriff's sons, and nothing happened. In all these incidents, nothing happened when they were victimized. And so these things are hard to cope with and deal with. But first of all, if people never acknowledge them, they'll never be able to deal with them. People in the U.S. keep trying to bury it, and God is bringing it to the forefront because He needs amends to be made. I want you guys to go look, and if you don't want to ask any friend, about these situations, because usually it's passed down from a great great grandmother or father if they're able to speak about this. But I can recount multiple situations and information that I got from my grandmother years before she passed. She lived to be almost 100 years old, and it was very vital to me understanding our history and systematic oppression. But if you don't want to do that, I encourage you to go and look at some biopics, some movies, biographies about black historical figures. For example, Malcolm X. It was a movie made about him in 1992. Now, you don't have to go look at the whole movie. I want to point out some of the atrocities. So, at the beginning, at least in the first 30 minutes or so of this movie, Malcolm X, he talks about how his mother, okay, his father was a minister and he traveled and he was trying to help black communities and all that stuff. And he would get attacked multiple times. They had houses that were burned by Klansmen. And he never really tried to kill anyone, but he would carry him a gun just to ward off Klan members that were trying to come towards his family and harm them. Anyway, one day he was killed, he was lynched. His wife went to collect the insurance policy because, she was a housewife and they had many children. And when she went to collect the policy, the insurance agent said that no, this is just deemed a suicide. And she was like, how could he commit suicide when he was shot and then laid across some railroad tracks or trolley tracks? How could he do that? No, that's just our decision. You don't get any money from that. So they never gave her the benefits from his, in order to bury him or what have you, and for the family to be able to go on. And so she lost the DHR, or child services came in, took all her children. She ended up going crazy. And these atrocities have happened over and over again. And so you'll see also in this movie called The Butler. It was released in 2013. The Butler is about a butler who served for several decades in the White House, served several presidents. But at the beginning of his history, his mother and father, who were slaves, were in a field. And it shows how his father was murdered by the slave owner because the slave owner would grab his wife, drag her in the house, and rape her. And one particular day, the butler's dad stood up to the slave owner and he shot and killed his father. So this is very traumatic, and it shows a scene where the mom is about going crazy. But anyway, she gave birth, she had the butler, and this is the beginning of his history. and the trauma that they had to suffer. This is not something that was uncommon by the Messiah. So I need y'all to understand that we have to peel back all these layers in order to address something that is at the core of the injustice that Adonai needs us to address as a society. Just like Sodom and Gomorrah, it was more than just sexual immorality that Adonai was judging Sodom and Gomorrah for. One of the biggest issues was the fact there was not an equal standard of justice, and also they were perpetuating repetitive atrocities against the poor, the needy, and the fatherless. They had unrepentant heart, and this is why Babylon is getting judged right now. There's a song also, I want you guys, if you have time to listen to it and decipher it. Many of our present day poets, just like past day, what I call poet lyricists, this particular one, Billie Holiday, sung a song called Strange Fruit. And if you listen to the lyrics, you'll be able to figure out what she means by strange fruit. These are atrocities she was able to see as she was traveling to sing throughout the U.S. And so Strange Fruit is a very short song, but it is poetically mind-boggling how she sings it, and you realize what she's talking about. When we look at the history of people like George Washington Carver, he's known as the peanut scientist, that's what we'll call him. And he was an integral part of why Tuskegee University was so big. He invested in all type of monies into there. He never had children of his own. And a big part of that is why when you look deep into his history, everybody want to glorify in history books him and all of his inventions and things he made from the peanut. But they never want to address the atrocities he suffered. He had a family that had about, I think, 10 or so siblings, and his mother and father, and that they were living at the residence, of course, of the slave owner. They all got kidnapped. The slave owners sent bounty hunters to find them. They only were able to come back, I think, with two. Well, I know they came back with George Washington Carver. So what happened to the other ones? You can pretty much guess what happened, even to his father and mother. Anyway, at age 6 or 7, George Washington Carver, the slave owner, took him to a doctor and made him a eunuch because he feared that George Washington Carver, as he grew older, would end up, being more than just friends with his daughter and potentially sleeping with her. So at 6 or 7 years old, he took George Washington Carver to a doctor, and he is what we call one of the last known eunuchs, Hebrew eunuchs. If you look at the story of James Brown, now our brother Chadwick Boseman, who has just passed away so young, but he had an honorable life. He played so many biopics, bio movies about different characters, and one was James Brown. And James Brown, when you look at his movie, it shows him. James Brown had a traumatic childhood. His dad was abusive towards his mom, or what have you, but that was common amongst all the oppression that they were surrounded by. But it shows him as a little boy playing in the woods, and as he goes out into the woods, he sees a person hanging from a tree that's dead. This is something that was not uncommon. I keep repeating over and over again through Black history and the ancestors of Black and Brown Hebrews here in America. And I'm pretty sure throughout other portions of the world. There's a lady named Shirley Sherrod. I don't know if any of you guys remember her, but she was the Georgia State Director of Rural Development during President Obama's term. And some people doctored up a video or sliced a video and tried to make her look like a racist. But she turned out to be far the opposite. And she had several people interviewed her, like on CBS, NBC, ABC, or I think Dateline carried an interview in which she talks about her origins. And she speaks about how her dad was a sharecropper. And there was an disagreement one day between her dad and this white sharecropper. And the white sharecropper walked up to him in the midst of a crowd of other sharecroppers and shot and killed her father. Once again, another traumatic situation. No one ever went to prison or jail for it. All of these traumatic situations you will rarely see ever in history where they cover where a white citizen, white official murders or takes the life of a black citizen and they ever go to prison for it. You have on record, when you look at in Montgomery, there's a lynching memorial. They cover the whole life of a family. I remember one particular family that they found that got hung, or a woman in her family, because this white man tried to rape her. She fought him off. And because she fought him off, they came back and they lynched the whole family. These traumatic things God expects us to recall and never ever forget. Just like the Holocaust that happened against European Jews. So the only way we can do that is we take back our narrative and make sure that we acknowledge it, never forget it, and make amends for it. Now, a lot of people may feel that Native Americans are not a part of the Hebrew history or legacy, but they are. If you go back and look at a lesson that I have out there, Biblical Racial Reconciliation, Lesson 4, Part 1. I attached a link out there to a YouTube channel. This YouTube channel is named, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, but I'm going to spell it to you guys, because y'all know me. It's Kurimio Ahal. It's spelled Kurimeo Ahau. And that particular YouTube channel is a brother who uncovers all of these Native American photos and actual historical descriptions from people who came from Europe about how they saw the Native American. And the Native American were dark skinned, copper colored skin. They were Negro. I covered that in Biblical Racial Reconciliation, Lesson 4, Part 1. I don't do it as eloquently as he does because I haven't gotten to all this video editing software, which I need to get, but he does it beautifully. So if you want to see it, go back to that particular video and click on the link that's in the description for that lesson. The last two pieces of evidence I want to share with you, and you can go on your own time and look at, is a YouTube channel. It's called VICE, VICE. And there's a video out there, and it's titled Genealogist Who Tracks Down Modern Day Slavery Practices. This is a 22-minute video or less, and it beautifully shows how, even though there was the abolition of slavery in 1865, it continues in some parts of America. And it covers this woman who's an investigator of present-day slavery practices and how she uncovers all of the deaths that were never basically solved and what happened to certain relatives. And this video is showing actual witness testimony of a family member of some people who were missing, and they know what happened to them. But if you look at that video, it is beautifully done, and it will show you how she got into this field. And the young man that's interviewing, you will see how much he's touched by looking at this situation and the things that she's uncovering. Now, you can also go look at the YouTube channel for CBS Evening News. And this one gives you hope, continual hope for the betterment of people who may have all these issues with racism and have prejudice, but they can change. Everyone is redeemable in the eyes of the Most High God. If you look at this video that's titled, How a Southerner Sheds His Racism, it is simply a 5-minute video. And this is a white veteran whose heart was changed by something that was stated by a black veteran. And once God touched his heart by what this black veteran said, he has been on a mission to reconcile the situations racially, because he knew and he recognized the heart of the Most High God that he was in the wrong. But it's just a 5-minute video, and if you look at it, it'll continue to renew your hope that everybody is redeemable in the eyes of the Most High God. Now, Body Messiah, this is the end of part 3 of lesson 9 of TBON. It is very vital that we continue to take back this narrative, speak the truth about it. In doing so, you'll uncover so much. There are so many Black and brown Hebrews that are out here roaming around that do not know who they are. And by sharing and remembering the Black Holocaust and the events that have occurred, you will help to awaken them to who they truly are. If you also, sometimes if you have friends who want to memorialize and also go and look at like Holocaust memorials and do that in a group effort, always mention to those same friends and remind them that there is a lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. Encourage them to partake in that particular memorial too, because this is a Black Holocaust that occurred. These are Black and brown Hebrews. Now, God will reveal the heart of the person once you invite them, whether or not, they won't even be bothered with this topic. I've been uninvited to prayer groups because I want to pray when the first opening of this memorial happened, when I want to bring up in prayer how this country should make amends for the atrocities. And that's fine. I've been uninvited, and that's fine, because I don't want to stand before the Most High on Judgment Day, then Him to tell me, hey, you didn't warn this person. You didn't tell this person. That's not going to be on me. So I'm fine if I'm uninvited. I have to speak the truth of the word of the Most High and do what He's obligated me to do. And for those of you who wrestle with that, that's going to be between you and the Most High. So, Body Messiah, I hope this lesson was eye-opening and informative. And I hope that you can move forward in good spirits to know that God is blessing us with this knowledge for a reason. It's not for it to fall by the wayside. We have to do things which honor Him, and remembering the atrocities of and acknowledging them of the Black Holocaust, we honor the Most High God. I probably will have a part 4, and it might cover 1965 to present day time, and it will deal with the atrocities have lessened, but they're still there, and I'll probably cover that time period in the next lesson. But thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you're able to join me for many, many more. And like I always say, may Adonai Elohim shield and protect you and your family, cover you and shower you in His shalom peace. Goodbye.